Washington, WNTEN, is a state in the Pacific Northwest region of the United States located north of Oregon, west of Idaho, and south of the Canadian province of British Columbia on the coast of the Pacific Ocean. Named after George Washington, the first president of the United States, the state was made out of the western part of the Washington Territory, which had been ceded by Britain in 1846 in accordance with the Oregon Treaty in the settlement of the Oregon Boundary Dispute. It was admitted to the Union as the 42nd state in 1889. Olympia is the state capital. Washington is sometimes referred to as Washington State or the State of Washington to distinguish it from Washington, D.C., the capital of the U.S., which is often shortened to Washington. Washington is the 18th largest with an area of 71,362 square miles, and the 13th most populous state with over 7 million people. Approximately 60% of Washington's residents live in the Seattle metropolitan area, the center of transportation, business, and industry along the Puget Sound region of the Salish Sea, an inlet of the Pacific Ocean consisting of numerous islands, deep fjords, and bays carved out by glaciers. The remainder of the state consists of deep temperate rainforests in the West Mountain Ranges in the west, central, northeast and far southeast, and a semi-arid basin region in the east, central, and south, given over to intensive agriculture. Washington is the second most populous state on the West Coast and in the western United States, after California. Mount Rainier is the state's highest elevation at almost 14,411 feet. Washington is a leading lumber producer. Its rugged surface is rich in stands of Douglas fir, hemlock, ponderosa pine, white pine, spruce, larch, and cedar. The state is the biggest producer of apples, hops, pears, red raspberries, spearmint oil, and sweet cherries, and ranks high in the production of apricots, asparagus, dry edible peas, grapes, lentils, peppermint oil, and potatoes. Livestock and livestock products make important contributions to total farm revenue, and the commercial fishing of salmon, halibut, and bottom fish makes a significant contribution to the state's economy. Manufacturing industries in Washington include aircraft and missiles, shipbuilding and other transportation equipment, lumber, food processing, metals and metal products, chemicals, and machinery. Washington has over 1,000 dams, including the Grand Coulee Dam, built for a variety of purposes including irrigation, power, flood control, and water storage. Etymology. The Washington Territory was named after George Washington, the first president of the United States. The area was originally part of a region called the Columbia District after the Columbia River. Incidentally, the area was renamed Washington in order to avoid confusion with the District of Columbia, which contains the city of Washington. Washington is the only U.S. state named after a president. To distinguish it from the U.S. capital, which is also named for George Washington, Washington is sometimes referred to as Washington State, or, in more formal contexts, as the State of Washington. Washingtonians and other residents of the Pacific Northwest refer to the state simply as Washington, calling the nation's capital Washington, D.C., or, more often, simply D.C. Geography. Washington is the northwesternmost state of the contiguous United States. Its northern border lies mostly along the 49th parallel, and then via marine boundaries through the Strait of Georgia, Haro Strait and Strait of Juan de Fuca, with the Canadian province of British Columbia to the north. Washington is bordered by Oregon to the south, with the Columbia River forming the western part and the 46th parallel forming the eastern part of the Oregon-Washington border. To the east, Washington borders Idaho, bounded mostly by the meridian running north from the confluence of the Snake River and Clearwater River, except for the southernmost section where the border follows the Snake River. To the west of Washington lies the Pacific Ocean. Washington is part of a region known as the Pacific Northwest, a term which always includes Washington and Oregon and may or may not include some or all of the following, depending on the user's intent: Idaho, western Montana, northern California, British Columbia, and Alaska. The high mountains of the Cascade Range run north-south, bisecting the state. In addition to western Washington and eastern Washington, residents call the two parts of the state the west side and east side, wet side and dry side, or timberland and wheatland, the latter pair more commonly in the names of region-specific businesses and institutions. Western Washington. For the Cascade Mountains westward, western Washington has a mostly marine west coast climate, with mild temperatures and wet winters, autumns and springs, and relatively dry summers. The Cascade Range contains several volcanoes, which reach altitudes significantly higher than the rest of the mountains. For the north to the south, these volcanoes are Mount Baker, Glacier Peak, Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens, and Mount Adams. Mount St. Helens is currently the only Washington volcano that is actively erupting. However, all of them are considered active volcanoes. Mount Rainier, the tallest mountain in the state, is 50 miles south of the city of Seattle, from which it is prominently visible. The 14,411-foot tall Mount Rainier is considered the most dangerous volcano in the Cascade Range due to its proximity to the Seattle metropolitan area, and most dangerous in the continental U.S. According to the Decade Volcanoes list, it is also covered with more glacial ice than any other peak in the contiguous 48 states. Western Washington also is home of the Olympic Mountains, far west on the Olympic Peninsula, which support dense forests of conifers and areas of temperate rainforest. These deep forests, such as the Hoh rainforest, are among the only temperate rainforests in the continental United States. Eastern Washington. Eastern Washington, the part of the state east of the Cascades, has a relatively dry climate, in distinct contrast to the west side. It includes large areas of semi-arid steppe and a few truly arid deserts lying in the rain shadow of the Cascades. The Hanford Reservation receives an average annual precipitation of 6 to 7 inches. Farther east, the climate becomes less arid, with annual rainfall increasing as one goes east to 21.2 inches in Pullman, near the Washington-Idaho border. The Okanagan Highlands and the rugged Kettle River Range and Selkirk Mountains cover much of the northeastern quadrant of the state. The Palos southeast region of Washington was grassland that has been mostly converted into farmland, and extends to the Blue Mountains. Climate as described above. Washington's climate varies greatly from west to east. An oceanic climate predominates in western Washington, and a much drier semi-arid climate prevails east of the Cascade Range. Major factors determining Washington's climate include the large semi-permanent high-pressure and low-pressure systems of the North Pacific Ocean, the continental air masses of North America, and the Olympic and Cascade Mountains. In the spring and summer, a high-pressure anticyclone system dominates the North Pacific Ocean, causing air to spiral out in a clockwise fashion. For Washington, this means prevailing winds from the northwest bring relatively cool air and a predictably dry season. In the autumn and winter, a low-pressure cyclone system takes over in the North Pacific Ocean, with air spiraling inward in a counterclockwise fashion. This causes Washington's prevailing winds, the Chinooks, to come from the southwest, bringing relatively warm and moist air masses and a predictably wet season. The term Pineapple Express is used colloquially to describe the extreme form of the wet season Chinook winds. Despite western Washington's having a marine climate similar to those of many coastal cities of Europe, There are exceptions such as the big snow events of 1880, 1881, 1893 and 1916, and the deep freeze winters of 1883 to 84, 1915-16, 1949-50 and 1955-56, among others. During these events, western Washington experienced up to 6 feet of snow, sub-zero temperatures, 3 months with snow on the ground, and lakes and rivers frozen over for weeks. Seattle's lowest officially recorded temperature is 0 degrees Fahrenheit, set on January 31, 1950, but low-altitude areas approximately 3 hours away from Seattle have recorded lows as cold as -48 degrees Fahrenheit. Weather during the cold season is greatly influenced by the Southern Oscillation. During the El Niño phase, the jet stream enters the U.S. farther south through California, therefore late fall and winter are drier than normal with less snowpack. The La Niña phase reinforces the jet stream through the Pacific Northwest, causing Washington to have even more rain and snow than average. In 2006, the Climate Impacts Group at the University of Washington published the impacts of climate change in Washington's economy, a preliminary assessment on the risks and opportunities presented given the possibility of a rise in global temperatures and their effects on Washington state. Rain shadow affects rainfall in Washington varies dramatically going from east to west. The western side of the Olympic Peninsula receives as much as 160 inches of precipitation annually, making it the wettest area of the 48 conterminous states and a temperate rainforest. Weeks may pass without a clear day. The western slopes of the Cascade Range receive some of the heaviest annual snowfall in the country. In the rain shadow area east of the Cascades, the annual precipitation is only 6 inches. Precipitation then increases again eastward toward the Rocky Mountains. The Olympic Mountains and Cascades compound this climatic pattern by causing orographic lift of the air masses blown inland from the Pacific Ocean, resulting in the windward side of the mountains receiving high levels of precipitation and the leeward side receiving low levels. This occurs most dramatically around the Olympic Mountains and the Cascade Range. In both cases, the windward slopes facing southwest receive high precipitation and mild, cool temperatures, while the Puget Sound lowlands are known for clouds and rain in the winter. The western slopes of the Cascades receive larger amounts of precipitation, often falling as snow at higher elevations. East of the Cascades, a large region experiences strong rain shadow effects. Semi-arid conditions occur in much of eastern Washington, with the strongest rain shadow effects at the relatively low elevations of the central Columbia Plateau, especially the region just east of the Columbia River from about the Snake River to the Okanagan Highland. Thus, instead of rain forests, much of eastern Washington is covered with grassland and shrub steppe. Temperatures. The average annual temperature ranges from 51 degrees Fahrenheit on the Pacific coast to 40 degrees Fahrenheit in the Northeast. The lowest temperature recorded in the state was -48 degrees Fahrenheit in Winthrop and Mazama. The highest recorded temperature in the state was 118 degrees Fahrenheit at Ice Harbor Dam. Both records were set east of the Cascades. Western Washington is known for its mild climate, considerable fog, frequent cloud cover and long-lasting drizzles in the winter, and warm, temperate summers. The eastern region occasionally experiences extreme climate. Arctic cold fronts in the winter and heat waves in the summer are not uncommon. In the western region, temperatures have reached as high as 112 degrees Fahrenheit in Marietta-Alderwood, and as low as -20 degrees Fahrenheit in Longview. Flora and fauna. Forests cover 52% of the state's land area, mostly west of the North Cascades. Approximately two-thirds of Washington's forested area is publicly owned, including 64% of federal land. Other common trees and plants in the region are camassia, Douglas fir, hemlock, penstemon, ponderosa pine, western red cedar, and many species of ferns. The state's various areas of wilderness offer sanctuary, with substantially large populations of shorebirds and marine mammals. The Pacific shore surrounding the San Juan Islands are heavily inhabited with killer gray and humpback whales. Mammals native to the state include the bat, black bear, bobcat, cougar, coyote, deer, elk, gray wolf, moose, mountain beaver, muskrat, opossum, pocket gopher, raccoon, river otter, skunk, and tree squirrel. Because of the wide range of geography, the state of Washington is home to several different ecoregions which allow for a varied range of bird species. This range includes raptors, shorebirds, woodland birds, grassland birds, ducks, and others. There have also been a large number of species introduced to Washington, dating back to the early 1700s, including horses and burros. The channel catfish, lamprey, and sturgeon are among the 400 known freshwater fishes. Along with the Cascades frog, there are several forms of snakes that define the most prominent reptiles and amphibians. Coastal bays and islands are often inhabited by plentiful amounts of shellfish and whales. There are 5 species of salmon that ascend the western Washington area, from streams to spawn. Washington has a variety of National Park Service units. Among these are the Alta Lake State Park, Lake Roosevelt National Recreation Area, San Juan Islands National Wildlife Refuge, as well as 3 national parks: the Olympic National Park, North Cascades National Park, and Mount Rainier National Park. The 3 national parks were established between 1899 and 1968. Almost 95% of Olympic National Park's area has been designated as wilderness under the National Wilderness Preservation System. Additionally, there are 143 state parks and 9 national forests run by the Washington State Park System and the United States Forest Service. The Okanagan National Forest is the largest national forest located on the west coast, encompassing 1,499,023 acres. It is managed together as the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest, encompassing a considerably larger area of around 3,239,404 acres. History. Early history. The skeletal remains of Kennewick Man, one of the oldest and most complete human remains ever found in North America, were discovered in Washington. Before the coming of Europeans, the region had many established tribes of Aboriginal Americans, notable for the totem poles and their ornately carved canoes and masks. Prominent among their industries were salmon fishing and, notably among the Maga, whale hunting. The peoples of the interior had a very different subsistence-based culture based on hunting, food gathering, and some forms of agriculture, as well as a dependency on salmon from the Columbia and its tributaries. The smallpox epidemic of the 1770s devastated the Native American population. European exploration. The first recorded European landing on the Washington coast was by Spanish Captain Don Bruno de Hecueta in 1775, on board the Santiago, part of a 2-ship flotilla with the Sonora. He claimed all the coastal lands up to Prince William Sound for Spain as part of the claimed rights under the Treaty of Tordesillas, which they maintained made the Pacific a Spanish lake, and all its shores part of the Spanish Empire. In 1778, British explorer Captain James Cook sighted Cape Flattery at the entrance to the Strait of Juan de Fuca, but Cook did not realize the strait existed. It was not discovered until Charles Charles William Barclay, captain of the Imperial Eagle, sighted it in 1787. The straits were further explored by Spanish explorers Manuel Quimper in 1790 and Francisco de Eliza in 1791, and British explorer George Vancouver in 1792. Settlement. The British-Spanish Nootka Convention of 1790 ended Spanish claims of exclusivity and opened the northwest coast to explorers and traders from other nations, most notably Britain and Russia, as well as the fledgling United States. American Captain Robert Gray then discovered the mouth of the Columbia River. He named the river after his ship, the Columbia. Beginning in 1792, Gray established trade in sea otter pelts. The Lewis and Clark expedition entered the state on October 10, 1805. Explorer David Thompson, on his voyage down the Columbia River, camped at the confluence with the Snake River on July 9, 1811, and erected a pole and a notice claiming the country for Great Britain and stating the intention of the Northwest Company to build a trading post at the site. Britain and the United States agreed to what has since been described as joint occupancy of lands west of the Continental Divide to the Pacific Ocean as part of the Anglo-American Convention of 1818, which established the 49th parallel as the international boundary west from a Lake of the Woods to the Rocky Mountains. Resolution of the territorial and treaty issues west to the Pacific were deferred until a later time. Spain, in 1819, ceded the rights north of the 42nd parallel to the United States, although these rights did not include possession. Negotiations with Great Britain over the next few decades failed to settle upon a compromise boundary, and the Oregon Boundary Dispute was highly contested between Britain and the United States. Disputed joint occupancy by Britain and the U.S. lasted for several decades, with American settlers pouring into Oregon country. Hudson's Bay Company, which had previously discouraged settlement because it conflicted with the fur trade, reversed its position in an attempt to maintain British control of the Columbia District. Fur trapper James Sinclair, on orders from Sir George Simpson, governor of the Hudson's Bay Company, led some 200 settlers from the Red River Colony west in 1841 to settle on Hudson Bay Company farms near Fort Vancouver. The party crossed the Rockies into the Columbia Valley, near present-day Radium Hot Springs, British Columbia, then traveled southwest down the Kootenai River and Columbia River. Despite such efforts, Britain eventually ceded all claims to land south of the 49th parallel to the United States in the Oregon Treaty on June 15, 1846. In 1836, a group of missionaries, including Mark E. Whitman, established several missions and Whitman's own settlement, Waiilapu, in what is now southeastern Washington state, near present-day Walla Walla County, in territory of both the Cayuse and the Nez Perce Indian tribes. Whitman's settlement would in 1843 help the Oregon Trail, the overland emigration route to the west, get established for thousands of emigrants in following decades. Marcus provided medical care for the Native Americans, but when Indian patients, lacking immunity to new European diseases, died in striking numbers, while at the same time many white patients recovered, they held medicine man Marcus Whitman personally responsible, and murdered Whitman and 12 other white settlers in the Whitman Massacre in 1847. This event triggered the Cayuse War between settlers and Indians. Fort Nisqually, a farm and trading post of the Hudson's Bay Company and the first European settlement in the Puget Sound area, was founded in 1833. Black pioneer George Washington Bush and his Caucasian wife Isabella James Bush, from Missouri and Tennessee, respectively, led 4 white families into the territory and founded New Market, now Tumwater, in 1846. They settled in Washington to avoid Oregon's discriminatory settlement laws. After them, many more settlers, migrating overland along the Oregon Trail, wandered north to settle in the Puget Sound area. Statehood. The growing populace of Oregon Territory north of the Columbia River formally requested a new territory, which was granted by the U.S. government in 1853. The boundary of Washington Territory initially extended farther east than the present states, including what is now the Idaho Panhandle and parts of western Montana, and picked up more land to the southeast that was left behind when Oregon was admitted as a state. The creation of Idaho Territory in 1863 established the final eastern border. A Washington state constitution was drafted and ratified in 1878, but it was never officially adopted. Although never approved by Congress, the 1878 Constitution is an important historical document which shows the political thinking of the time. It was used extensively during the drafting of Washington State's 1889 Constitution, the one and only official constitution of the state of Washington. Washington became the 42nd state in the United States on November 11, 1889. Early prominent industries in the state included agriculture and lumber. In eastern Washington, the Yakima River Valley became known for its apple orchards, while the growth of wheat using dry farming techniques became particularly productive. Heavy rainfall to the west of the Cascade Range produced dense forests, and the ports along Puget Sound prospered from the manufacturing and shipping of lumber products, particularly the Douglas fir. Other industries that developed in the state included fishing, salmon canning and mining. Industrial era. For a long period, Tacoma was noted for its large smelters where gold, silver, copper and lead ores were treated. Seattle was the primary port for trade with Alaska and the rest of the country, and for a time it possessed a large shipbuilding industry. The region around eastern Puget Sound developed heavy industry during the period including World War I and World War II, and the Boeing Company became an established icon in the area. During the Great Depression, a series of hydroelectric dams were constructed along the Columbia River as part of a project to increase the production of electricity. This culminated in 1941 with the completion of the Grand Coulee Dam, the largest concrete structure in the United States. During World War II, the state became a focus for war industries. While the Boeing Company produced many of the nation's heavy bombers, ports in Seattle, Bremerton, Vancouver, and Tacoma were available for the manufacture of warships. Seattle was the point of departure for many soldiers in the Pacific, a number of whom were quartered at Golden Gardens Park. In eastern Washington, the Hanford Works atomic energy plant was opened in 1943 and played a major role in the construction of the nation's atomic bombs. Mount St. Helens eruption, 1980. On May 18, 1980, following a period of heavy tremors and eruptions, the northeast face of Mount St. Helens erupted violently, destroying a large part of the top of the volcano. The eruption flattened the forests, killed 57 people, flooded the Columbia River and its tributaries with ash and mud, and blanketed large parts of Washington eastward and other surrounding states in ash, making day look like night.